So are there ethical rules in negotiation? This is a question I encounter all the time, and the answer is a decided yes. In this video, I'm going to discuss some ethical guidelines that govern the art of negotiation, why they matter, and how to ensure that your negotiation tactics align with these principles. So let me start by distinguishing two kinds of ethical rules or guidelines. One are guidelines that are required, and the second are guidelines that relate to personal ethical or moral standards. So let's start with what I would call required ethical norms. Broadly speaking, required ethical norms come from four different sources. The first and the most basic is, what does the law require? So there are legal expectations around, for example, lying in negotiation. So the law of fraud says that if you say something that you know to be true for the purpose of misleading, and then the other person makes a decision acting in what's called reasonable reliance on that statement you made, if it was false, you could be held for fraud. So let me give you an example. If, for example, I'm selling a used car, and that car 2 years previously had been in a very serious accident, and I am asked by a buyer, has this car ever been in an accident? And I say, absolutely not. It's never been in an accident. And then acting in reasonable reliance on that, the buyer buys the car, I actually have committed fraud. The reason why is I was asked a question, I knew what the answer was, and I purposefully lied about it, and it is quite relevant to the decision of the buyer whether or not to buy the car. Beyond the law is a second area of ethics, which is what a particular profession might require. So, for example, doctors usually have to follow a code of ethics. So do lawyers. So do other professions. So in negotiation, beyond what the law requires, you also have to follow the code of ethics of your particular profession. The third domain of required ethics might be a standards of behavior or code of conduct that a particular company or organization might have. So, for example, many companies have some aspirational codes of behavior that they expect their employees to have. And if you are violating that, while you couldn't be held liable in the law, it could be the case that you would face some kind of discipline within your company. So, outside of the required norms are another set of standards that matter in negotiation. Broadly speaking, they're what I would call your own moral, personal, or religious code. And in negotiation, it's really important to do some soul searching so that you know what they are before you go into a negotiation. How do I think about this? Well, there's any number of personal tests that you might use in thinking about whether a particular behavior is okay. For example, one really simple one is, if I'm looking at myself in the mirror the next morning, can I live with myself? Now, that's probably a pretty low standard, but it's some standard. Another thing I might think about is, how would I feel if what I'm doing was made known and appeared in the New York Times? Would I feel good about myself? Would I feel like I was okay? Or perhaps a more morbid way of thinking about this is, if I were writing my epitaph on my tombstone, would the behavior I'm about to do in this negotiation be consistent and line up with my legacy? Or, for example, if I had to write my own obituary, would the way I'm acting in this negotiation line up with my own legacy? And these can be really hard questions because in a negotiation, it's really easy for us to focus on our short-term interests, right? Lying a little bit here might get us a little bit more. So before we go into negotiation, I think it's really important to actually think about our own personal ethical code. In any given negotiation, there could be an overwhelming incentive to lie or stretch the truth or plead ignorance in a way that can cause an override around your own ethical code. Many years ago, I had gotten a promotion at work, and I was then negotiating some of the benefits that would come with that promotion. And along the way, this was a pretty tough negotiation, and I was being advised by any number of my friends. And one of my very well-meaning friends gave me a bunch of advice, and advice that I think, frankly, would have worked incredibly well. It was the kind of behavior that people in this organization regularly engaged in. No one would have looked askance at it. It was in no way a violation of the law, any kind of professional standard, any kind of organizational standard, any kind of organizational code of ethics. At the same time, after hearing the advice, I had to do a personal inventory of my own code of ethics, right? What felt comfortable to me and who I was as a person. And I ultimately decided that was just not who I wanted to be. And that if this promotion was going to work, and if I was going to accept this job, it would have to be on the merits of the way I negotiated, consistent with my own ethics. Now, I'm happy to report that I was able to do this successfully and was able to accept the promotion, and we reached an agreement. But that was a really interesting lesson for me, to realize that being true to myself, being a fully integrated person, had more value than simply getting something I wanted in a negotiation. So whenever you go into negotiation, it's important to know ethics are always there. There are formal requirements. What does the law say? Does your profession have any certain standards that you need to follow? What about the organization for which you work? Are there relevant codes of behavior that you need to follow? But then secondly, and I would say equally as importantly, understanding your own morality, your own ethical code, what feels comfortable to you. So, to continue your learning, watch this next video, which is how to negotiate a higher salary after a job offer. Also, before you leave, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would subscribe to my channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you never miss any content. Okay, it's super ethical to keep watching.